Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Election day is, let me check my notes. Yes, exactly. Well, it's less than 2 weeks away. And guess what? Nearly 25 million people in this country have already voted as of this afternoon. On the trail today, Vice President Harris, former President Trump are courting voters in Pennsylvania and Georgia, respectively. But over that whole campaign maneuvering, it's fair to say, statements made by President Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, in a New York Times interview. Let's listen to some of that.
He's certainly an authoritarian, admires people who are dictators. He has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure.
In response to that interview, Vice President Harris warned that Trump, quote, wants unchecked power, unquote, and will not be reined in.
This is a window into who Donald Trump really is. From the people who know him best, from the people who worked with him side by side in the Oval Office and in the Situation Room. Donald Trump is increasingly unhinged and unstable. And in a second term, people like John Kelly would not be there to be the guardrails against his propensities and his actions.
Harris is in Pennsylvania now, preparing for a CNN town hall to be televised later this evening. She stopped at a volunteer appreciation event at a Philadelphia deli this afternoon. Meanwhile, former President Trump participated in a town hall at a church in Zebulon, Georgia. He's also delivering remarks at a rally in Duluth, Georgia, later this evening. Our Nikole, Killion, and Robert Costa are covering all of this for us. I want to start with Nikole in Duluth, Georgia, with the Trump campaign. So, Nikole, the Trump campaign has a response to this John Kelly interview. Tell us what it is.
Well, they are basically disputing what John Kelly said about the former president, saying that these are more debunked stories from Kelly that have been fabricated. And certainly it is no surprise that both the former president and John Kelly have had their differences over the years. And this really isn't the first time that John Kelly has criticized the former president. But while we haven't heard directly from the former president responding to these claims, many within his orbit have.
And Nikole, I hear you competing quite well with the noise around you. Peter Navarro being introduced. We can see that on the big screen over your shoulder. I understand you had a chance to talk to some voters while you were there in Georgia. What did you hear?
Yeah, that's right. Well, listen, obviously the big question was whether or not these comments might sway voters. But considering that the former president has a very strong and entrenched base, most of the people we talked to here, many of whom have been waiting here since before the sun came up, in essence told us that this really doesn't change their view of the former president. Take a listen to what they told me earlier today.
Oh, I don't buy it at all. I don't care about your books. I don't care if he's got orange hair or he did whatever he did. We don't care about that. We care about this country. And I'm going to tell you something. He was the president, the only president that made us feel patriotic again.
Does it trouble you that some of these comments are coming from people within his administration or his former administration?
Well, he may say things he don't mean sometimes, but you know what? We all say things we don't mean sometimes. We all slip up sometimes, whatever.
Pushing the boulder up the hill. How do you get college kids these days to vote Republican?
So again, in terms of these voters, for the most part, as you heard there, they're still standing by the former president, which is what we continue to see time and again, even with someone like John Kelly, a retired four-star general, issuing this kind of warning about the former president and some of the things that he said behind closed doors. Many of these voters remain unmoved, which is kind of what we have seen time and again. Every time there is another story or the former president says something inflammatory, these voters tell me that they are willing to look past that because for them it's still more about the former president's policies than his personality and his rhetoric.
They tend to stick and stay, Trump supporters do. Nikole, Killion, Thanks so very much. I want to bring in Robert Costa. Robert, your perspective on the day's events, the John Kelly interview, the Atlantic article. Is it, from your vantage point, mostly cable fodder or something the Trump campaign ought to be somewhat nervous about?
We're seeing Major, this campaign, return to the center of gravity that long dominated it when President Biden was in the race. Biden's closest advisors, like Mike Donnellan, have long argued that Trump's conduct going back to 2016, 2017, with his response to the white supremacy march in Charlottesville, necessitated that democracy was at the fore of the political message from the Democrats. And you heard that again and again from President Biden. You didn't necessarily hear the focus on democracy day in, day out. Once Vice President Harris became the presumptive nominee, there was more focus on introducing her to the country, the economy, and other issues. But now, as the election nears, the sense of alarm among Democrats is driving so much of their activity, and so is the news, including the comments made by the retired general.
And based on your reporting, Robert, the early summer for the Harris campaign was the joy brat summer, consolidating the base, creating that sense of excitement, possibility. But if they believe that they have locked down more or less the Democratic base of support, except for some very much tailored outreach to Latino men and African-American men, is this focus on Trump to get those still undecided fence-sitters, possibly lightly attached Republicans, still torn about their choice?
You can look at what Vice President Harris said today about retired General Kelly in his remarks in the same light as you saw her events with former Congresswoman Liz Cheney. It's all part of a broader appeal to suburban Republicans, many of them women, living outside of Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Detroit, Atlanta, maybe even Houston and other parts of the country.
Raleigh, Charlotte.
North Carolina. I was just with former President Trump there. And he knows, the Trump campaign knows, I'm told by sources close to him, that they have some soft support among some traditional Republicans. That's why Trump is going back to his base, to evangelical Christians. I was with him on Monday when he was with Franklin Graham, the evangelist. And you see this emphasis on Trump stoking his base to make sure that if he loses the Nikki Haley voter or the Liz Cheney Republican, he still has enough Republicans coming out for him.
And we have 25 million voters who've already cast ballots. They've already made up their mind. Is there much left in the persuasion part of this calendar, Robert, or do you believe it is essentially what the political professionals always tell it is at this time of a campaign, getting out the vote?
I think you can't read too much into the early vote numbers. It shows a lot of energy and interest in this campaign.
Both sides, yep.
But especially after 2020 and the way vote by mail was handled by Republicans, there was an aversion to it. Now there's an emphasis on it
from
Trump himself.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say that this leads to a Republican wave or a Democratic wave. It's early vote, it's interest, but that day of vote still matters. Republicans have long done pretty well in many states on day of voting, but you see Democrats believing they can still draw out non-voters day of. They're thinking about 2022, those people who don't normally participate in elections. In 2016, they liked an outsider in Trump. In 2022, some of those outside voters who don't participate came to the polls because of abortion rights. Will they do so again in 2024? Democrats wonder that.
And there are also lots of people who registered for the first time this summer. And we don't know what they're going to do either, and they're not showing up in the polls. Robert Costa, always a pleasure.
Thank you,
sir.